1951. The Geiger counter was the only sound keeping Dr. Lena Mercer tethered to the present, its steady clicking a cold, precise reminder of how fragile this moment was, how close she was to losing everything she had worked for. Outside the thick, reinforced glass of the command module, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly under a moonless sky, a dead world of dust and secrets. The wind had died, leaving only the occasional whisper of shifting sand. Shadows stretched across the barren landscape, carving grotesque, impossible shapes. It was August 2006, and Lena stood on restricted government ground, Site Echo 19, a facility buried 40 miles northwest of Groom Lake, a place the U.S. Army wanted erased from history. She was hunting ghosts, not the ethereal kind, the ones of rumor, memory, and family legacy, but ghosts in uniform. For 55 years, no one had dared investigate what had happened to the 7 U.S. Army reconnaissance troopers who vanished here during a classified weapons test in 1951. The official explanation had been swift, brutal, and brutally simple. Training accident. 2 words that had destroyed careers, ruined reputations, silenced families, and classified every shred of truth under layers of redacted ink. But Lena Mercer, military historian, physicist, and granddaughter of the youngest member of the squad, never accepted it. Not for a second. She had spent half her life digging through old records, satellite anomalies, and obscure flight logs. She had painstakingly reconstructed assignments, personnel transfers, and quiet disappearances. Every footnote, every erased or altered entry in military archives whispered a question that had never been answered. 7 men who walked into Echo 19 and never walked out again. Tonight she had one chance left. A 3-day permit, limited funding, and a sinking feeling that she was already being watched. "Doc, you're going to want to see this." The voice came from Ethan Cole, her field engineer, a silent, meticulous man with the haunted stare of someone who had spent too many years buried in top-secret work. He stood beside the ground-penetrating radar station, staring at the screen as if afraid to blink. Lena moved closer, her pulse quickened. At first, the monitor displayed nothing but random static, the kind of noise she had spent decades learning to ignore. Then faintly, shapes emerged, hard angles, rectangular geometry, sharp lines beneath the desert floor, lower levels, a structure. A buried bunker. "No record of any installation at this location," Ethan said quietly. Of course there was. This was Nevada in the early 50s, when the government had learned how to hide things before they even existed. "Mark the coordinates," Lena whispered. "We dig." Hours later, floodlights carved a harsh circle into the desert sand, illuminating a steel hatch large enough to drive a truck through. The blast door was scorched, warped. The marks weren't old, not entirely. Someone or something had forced its way in or out. Ethan brushed dust from a faded emblem near the hinge. The 5th Reconnaissance Regiment insignia. Lena's throat tightened, her grandfather's unit. "This is it," she said. "Open it." The hydraulic cutters screamed, a high-pitched wail that echoed across the barren desert. The door shifted. A draft of cold, stale, radioactive air escaped into the night, carrying with it the taste of decades-old decay. The Geiger counter immediately crackled violently. "Levels are spiking," Ethan warned. "Just enough to scare off amateurs," Lena countered. "Not enough to kill 7 trained soldiers." They descended the rusted ladder into darkness. Their headlamps cut feeble arcs across the interior, illuminating a hallway frozen in 1951, peeling paint, collapsed ceiling tiles, scattered paperwork. The remnants of human life and work abandoned, decayed, yet strangely intact. But as they walked deeper, it became obvious this wasn't the slow work of time. Something violent had happened here. When they reached the operations chamber, Ethan stopped dead. "Doc, look." 7 metal chairs arranged in a perfect semicircle, 7 restraints bolted to the floor, 7 nameplates welded to the back of each chair: Mercer, Hargrove, Nolan, Tate, Ruiz, Donnelly, Pierce. Lena's hand trembled as she touched her grandfather's nameplate. Cold metal, impossibly preserved. "What was this?" Ethan asked, voice low. "Interrogation, testing, torture," Lena whispered. Before either of them could answer, Ethan angled his light toward the floor. Lena froze. Burn patterns, circular, precise, surrounded each chair. The concrete had been melted, radiated, not by anything conventional. "Laser damage?" she asked, disbelief curling in her throat. Ethan shook his head. No laser melts concrete at 3,000 degrees without scorching the metal restraints. Whatever did this, it's not in any physics manual. On a warped desk lay a half-burned notebook. Lena carefully picked it up. The pages were mostly ash, but a single entry remained intact, written in a spidery, panicked hand. July 17, 1951, 02, 14 hours. 7 subjects restrained. Phase 2 initiated. Containment holding, but energy readings are unstable. If this fails, no one will ever know what we saw. No one must. July 17, 1951, 02, 17 hours. They're waking up. God help us. Shut it down, shut it. The rest was ash. Ethan exhaled slowly. Subjects phase 2, what were they doing to them? Lena felt a chill crawl down her spine. This wasn't a training accident. They were experimenting on my grandfather's team. Radiation flickered against the reinforced blast door at the end of the hall. Lena noticed something overlooked even by government investigators. The locking mechanism wasn't cut, wasn't blown outward. It had been melted from the inside. "Doc," Ethan whispered, "I don't think they vanished." Lena stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. The Geiger counter maxed out, warning of radiation levels that should have been fatal. The steel door groaned, shifting slightly as if breathing. Something moved behind it, not dead, not alive, not fully human. Then came a sound, a low, distorted murmur, like a radio transmission bleeding through a storm. Then clearer, then unmistakable. "Help us." Lena staggered backward. Her hand flew to her mouth. That voice, it was her grandfather. A voice that should not exist. A voice from 1951. A voice that had been trapped here for 55 years. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Doc, some doors are buried for a reason." But Lena couldn't look away. The temperature plummeted. Their breath fogged in the frigid, radiated air. The walls seemed to breathe. The door groaned louder, bulging outward, twisted metal screaming under pressure. Then it opened. Not fully, just a fraction. And from that gap, a light, unnatural, phosphorescent slipped through, illuminating the warped interior like a beacon from another dimension. The voices grew louder. Now distinct, now unrelenting. "Lena, open, open." 7 voices speaking in unison. 7 soldiers calling her name. They entered step by hesitant step. Lena's headlamp barely penetrated the thick shadows. The concrete walls were etched with patterns she couldn't recognize. Symbols, diagrams, and scientific formulas scorched into the surface as if by molten energy. Rusted machinery hummed faintly. Equipment, decades old, pulsed with a life she didn't understand. The operations chamber had once been a research lab. The chairs were no longer just chairs, they were conduits. Cables ran from each seat into the walls, severed but still radiating residual power. The scorched metal smelled of ozone, radiation, and something far older, far fouler. Lena bent over a console, brushing decades of dust from a switch. Sparks leapt. Lights flickered to life, revealing a control panel that defied her understanding. It wasn't just military technology, it was something else, something experimental and dangerous. Their headlamps swept over the floors, the walls, the ceilings. Lena could see remnants of restraints and instruments that suggested experimentation far beyond human comprehension. Radiation readings fluctuated violently. Symbols glowed faintly. And then she saw it, what the government had never recorded. Organic tissue fused with metal, veins interlaced with wires, eyes implanted with sensors, a ribcage reinforced with steel rods. The 7 soldiers weren't dead, they had been changed, weaponized. And now they sensed her. The blast door groaned again. The metal was bending, stretching impossibly. Ethan screamed. "Run!" The lights exploded, sparks rained down, the concrete shook, and from the failing door 7 forms moved, not fully human, not fully machine, and their voices all at once. Calling her name. The desert sky above Echo 19 remained silent. The moonless void watched in impassive darkness as the bunker, long buried and forgotten, awakened again. Inside, Lena and Ethan were surrounded by shadows, radiation, and the impossible. The vanished 7 soldiers of legend, soldiers of horror, soldiers of truth, had returned. And now, the secret of 1951 would not stay buried.